joining live in the action. It's been a little bit more than 20 minutes, but I actually just booked the next show because it was just a Sunday TV show. Technically an A show, but I treat it as my B show as long as we have a main event that hits. That's the stuff. Um, we booked Brian Pillman in a match because he's going to be the subject of our next Dark Side TEW. Um, so yeah, we're going to be booking Brian Pillman. We're going to be the pencil. If you get what I'm putting down. Anyway, Brian Pillman is on his way to taking the light heavyweight title off of Dutch Mantel. It's a big first step here, defeating Sika. Sika's been pretty protected since I brought him in from the F, um, and pretty much been, I wouldn't say winning, but not taking the loss in a tag match with Afa um, most often. So he's been pretty well protected, but we got Brian Pillman submitting him with a crucifix armbar today, and we'll be able to see the rest of the card. I like that idea of jumping in to the action just as Pillman's match was going off. Um, but yeah, high flyer taking on a monster in the age of in my company already, we're starting to see like Shawn Michaels's and like the likes, we're ushering in the 90s before it happens. But I opened the company early, all the following. But um, yeah. Anyway, we brought Brian Pillman up, and look at him. He's throwing 76s out there. He definitely deserves it. So we just need to get him over in the eyes of the fans. All right. We have the Unholy Union um, being defeated in a wild brawl here against the Steiner brothers. Pretty good overall. Happy with that. A 100 on the speech. Good stuff. All right. And ooh, okay. Okay. That's the end of our show here, folks. No post show. That's correct. Okay. 85. Oh, okay. The angles brought it up. Those were some really good angles. In any event, speaking of really good angles, I got a segue there for you. Let's get to the kind of background music for TEW since we don't have any music or anything with TEW, or at least I mute the music for TEW as soon as I download it on any given console, PC. Um, but
The
yeah,
first time I saw him, he
let's
had
do
this
some
magnetic charisma that you could feel across the gym.
Brian Pillman
And
stuff.
you just thought, hey man, this guy's a star.
And I'll do whatever it takes to look adversity in the face and spit in its eye.
The wrestling world could never have imagined that an undersized football player from Cincinnati would revolutionize the business, ushering in a whole new era.
Shut the hell up!
Still looks like it when you're Pillmaning the chair there.
Anybody over, and how he could make that play for his own advantage.
In an industry that
Looks
depends on the illusion
real.
of reality, no one did more to blur the lines than Brian Pillman, who shattered wrestling's fourth wall.
He was going against the script. This has never been done before.
What the fuck are you doing? Easy!
Pillman's over-the-top antics exposed the inner workings of the business, leveraging trade secrets to make the deal of a lifetime.
That loose cannon gimmick, he just took it so far.
A lot of people thought, oh man, it was too extreme.
You didn't know where Brian started and his wrestling persona ended.
Get him the hell out of here!
He had a lot of troublesome relationships with women.
My mom had had enough, and that kind of pushed her over the edge a little bit.
He's being driven crazy at home. He's supposed to be crazy at work, and in between, he's probably really going crazy.
On track to become a wrestling superstar at the price of his own sanity, his rise to the top was tragically cut short.
I'm watching the pre-show for the pay-per-view.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some tragic news to report.
I just screamed.
He had a persona that he wanted to perpetuate, even if it killed him.
Brian Pillman. Oh, we're not in full screen, yo. What happened? There we go.
Man, this is the gold chain that
I know you're
Brian
not in
Pillman
full
got
screen.
for
You're
me way
still
back in the day.
over here.
And I'll never forget, we were riding down the road one day, and he goes, "Kid, we got to have gold chains." He goes, "They'll look great." And all these years later, I don't have a lot of things, you know, from my old wrestling days, but this chain is something that I'll always have. It's very sentimental to me, and it was a big part of the makeup and the gimmick of the Hollywood Blondes. I'm Steve Austin, a friend of Brian's from way back in our WCW days, and we were tag team partners. Turned out to be really good friends and a pretty damn good tag team.
The Hollywood Blondes!
Brian didn't phone nothing in. He wanted to go out there and perform. The guy that was never supposed to be big enough or bad enough or strong enough to do anything. He blew everybody away with his tenacity and his will to win. He was a good-looking guy, great physique, high flyer, could do everything.
Brian was very athletic. Really seemed like he was willing to try anything, and you could tell that he really wanted to be a pro wrestling star. I'm Jim Ross, and when I was in WCW in the mid-'80s, Brian was a guy that we had very high hopes for and really wanted to sign.
Because after we're done pounding you in submission, the only thing that's going to be prescribed for you guys afterwards is a liquid diet of embalming fluid.
Brian, from the time he first got in the ring, you could tell he was a performer. He was an exhibitionist. He wanted you to notice him. He had the personality for wrestling. I'm Jim Cornette. I've been involved in professional wrestling for over 40 years as a manager, promoter, announcer, matchmaker, and I was good friends in the 80s and 90s with Brian Pillman.
Submit.
He wasn't trying to just be the move guy. He wasn't just trying to be the guy with the nice mullet and the abs. Like, he was trying to be everything. He was trying to hit this business on all fronts and fire on all cylinders, and he was trying to be the biggest star that the business had ever seen. My name is Brian Pillman Jr. I am the only son of the late, great Brian Pillman, otherwise known as the Loose Cannon.
Brian was a natural promo. When they stuck a mic in front of him, he would just go off in that raspy voice.
You're not running this interview. I am, because I'm Brian fucking Pillman.
Growing up, Brian had multiple polyps on his vocal cords, and it was closing up his air passage. They'd scrape them off, and then after so long, they'd grow right back again. And that's why his voice was so raspy, because his vocal cords had been scraped so many times. I'm Linda, Brian's older sister. You know, he had over 40 surgeries. I don't know the exact number. When my mother came in from work one day, she could hear breathing as soon as she came in the house, and it was closing up his air passage. And she called the doctor. She had to hold the receiver up so he could hear him breathing, and that's when he decided he needed emergency tracheotomy. He told my mother to have the ambulance bring them to his house, because his house was closer than the hospital. And he put a tracheotomy in Brian on his dining room table in the middle of the night. But it never stopped him from doing anything. He was always outside playing and running, and he wasn't allowed to talk for like 2 or 3 weeks after those surgeries, and he didn't talk.
As a result of that, I think he overcompensated later on by wanting to always talk, wanting to be an entertainer. It formed him as the guy that was going to overcome, overachieve, knock down the obstacles, whatever the case may be.
The son of a bitch was fearless. I mean, he's a tough nut. My name is Kim Wood. I was the Paul Brown strength coach for the Cincinnati Bengals, and Pillman get a chance to try out with us. My instruction was to kill him. And not literally kill him, but damn close. But he tried his ass off.
You know, he always said it's not about the size of the dog in the fight, it's about the size of the fight and the dog.
He had a reputation in Cincinnati being a street fighter.
I heard that he was at some bar that had a upper floor, like a balcony or whatever you want to call it. And he was up there and some girl threw a drink in his face. And her boyfriend came after Brian. Before it was over, the guy was hanging, Brian had him hanging by his ankles over the railing, over the first floor. And Brian was banned from that bar.
Yeah.
After a brief stint in the NFL, Brian heads to Calgary to play in the Canadian Football League. Soon after, Brian suffers an ankle injury, cutting his career short, which leaves him searching for what to do next.
One thing I knew about Brian was that he wasn't going to be a high school teacher. He wasn't going to sell insurance. There was a lot of things he wasn't going to do, where he could use his toughness and his physicality to make money.
Well, a couple years ago when I was with the Bengals, Kim Wood, the strength coach, he had talked to me about getting into professional wrestling. He thought I had all the tools needed to be successful. And it turns out Calgary happens to be the premier training ground for wrestlers in the world.
And I said, hey, while you're up there, go check out this Hart bunch.
The Harts are the first family of Canadian wrestling, with patriarch Stu Hart at the helm. In addition to his children that would go on to be wrestling icons, the family also discovered and trained several other future superstars.
They take them into the Hart dungeon, and they teach them how to wrestle in one of the most prestigious ways to break into the business that there is.
How would you sort of describe what the dungeon is to someone who doesn't know what it is?
Well, from what I hear, if you can't hear screaming coming out of it, something's not going right.
Stu, the old man, would put people in submission holes and then not let them out of the thing for, 3 or 4 hours. If you could survive that, you could survive almost anything.
So you get that great foundation all right off the bat from Stu. It was an easy bridge to cross from football to wrestling.
Brian gets his start in Stampede Wrestling, and although it's a small territory in Western Canada, its influence on the industry is felt around the wrestling world.
In the 80s, there were millions of wrestling fans, but there was a small subset called smart fans that knew the inside inner workings of wrestling.
The insiders all knew the name Brian Pillman pretty quick. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. It's an insider publication that's covered pro wrestling since 1982. For a long time, it was like really the only, what I would call true source of pro wrestling information that was out there.
The sheets were kind of a thing back in the day. You didn't really want to get caught with them. It's kind of like secret documents. And then it kind of got out that damn near all the boys are reading.
I mean, with Brian, he had started wrestling when he called me the first time. And he wanted to send me tapes and wanted me to send tapes, so we traded tapes. As far as student of the game, I mean, top level more than almost anyone that I've ever dealt with.
Meltzer was a good gauge for talent, so that tipped me off that Meltzer kept writing good things about Brian. Brian wound up in WCW by me getting a hold of you.
All right, Brian, best of luck on that endeavor, ladies.
Upon arriving in WCW,
These kids, dude,
top star and
can't get them to sign
matchmaker
for
Ric
6
Flair
months.
sees something in Brian and looks to feature him on television in a main event spot.
do a
And we
3-month
put that
program
match
with
together,
you.
and it
Let's
was
do
one of the highest rated Saturday night television programs on TBS at that point in the previous several years. And the crowd popped for it.
Crowd chanting, go, Brian, go.
Ric Flair was the kind of guy that wanted to go in the ring with somebody like Brian and go 30 or 45 minutes and tear the house down, and then he wanted to go to the bar with Brian or somebody like Brian for 5 or 6 hours and tear the house down there.
That's the way he lived. He lived a cartoon life, a fantasy life of limos and long black socks and alligator shoes and, babes.
I think Brian liked aspects of the lifestyle a lot. He wanted to be like Ric Flair.
Brian Pillman was a ladies' man. I mean, he's a gorgeous guy. He's on television. He's a professional athlete. So, yeah, a lot of the women were attracted to Brian.
Rochelle was a woman that Brian met at a club downtown Cincinnati. They were happy, and we all loved her. She went and lived with him in Calgary for a while. before he got the contract down in Atlanta. And that's when Brittany was born in Atlanta.
My name is Brittany Pillman. I'm the daughter of Brian Pillman. I was a daddy's girl. You know, everyone sees him as this wrestler and always on the road, and, you know, wrestling was his life, but outside of wrestling, his children were his life. My dad thought I was his firstborn child. When I was a year old, he found out that he had another daughter out there that was 2 years old.
I'm Danielle Pillman. I go by Danny, and Brian Pillman is my father, and I am the oldest of his kids. My dad met my mom at the waterfront in Cincinnati, like some bar. And I mean, it was like a very brief love affair. But she did end up becoming pregnant.
Wow.
That my dad had Rochelle as his girlfriend at the time. So yeah, that's kind of why she didn't want to disclose that to my father immediately. But at a certain point, she felt like, you know, I needed my dad. And the second that I came into the picture, he was there for me 100% and wanted me to be in every part of his life. And I think that's something to be said about him, is that he really did care about his kids.
I'll bring you up.
You know, my dad living that lifestyle and all these different women, and, you know, he had obviously cheated on my mom many times. I'm sure that was hard on her, but she stayed with him, you know. She had a lot of issues. She suffered with major depression. There was a time my mom and dad were living in Atlanta, and my dad was at a show.
The groundskeeper broke into the place and attacked her with an ice pick.
And she was stabbed several times.
Was he trying to rob her? Or?
Rob her, whatever, I don't know. Stabbed her in the face. Stabbed her in the cheek. So that'll mess you up.
Yeah. No kidding.
Brian Pillman's good looks and athletic ability allow him a spot on the card as a generic hero. But he's not content to stay in one place for long, nor do what he's told.
He was reasonably successful, but, you know, he wanted to be a main eventer, and he wasn't a main eventer yet. He was a good mid-level guy.
You know, Brian's first couple years in WCW were tough. I'm Eric Bischoff, former president of WCW, and once upon a time, Brian Pillman's boss. Brian wasn't relatively new on the scene his first couple years in WCW, so he had to earn his respect. What probably made that even tougher was the amount of management transitions that took place.
Constant changeover in management led to stop-and-start pushes in Brian's career. As soon as he started to gain ground and earn respect, new matchmakers would arrive, pushing Brian back down to the bottom.
But finally, they put Brian together with Steve Austin.
He's ready to back you up 100%.
All right, stunning Steve Austin.
And I wasn't thrilled at all.
When people hear the name Steve Austin, they think he was always the biggest star in wrestling. At the time in 1993, he was still finding his way, hadn't got a main event spot yet.
And this is about when I'm fixing to start getting a run as a United States champion, so I was really looking forward to that. I walk in the building, and here's Brian coming up behind me, and I knew Brian, but we weren't hanging out. He goes, "Hey, kid, we need to come up with a finish." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He goes, "We're tag team now." And I was really not happy. I had nothing against Brian, but it's like I was a singles wrestler. I enjoyed working with another guy in the ring and only having to depend on myself. And they didn't have no name planned for us, no this, no that. It was two singles guys, and they were going to throw us together as an interim tag team, basically to get other people over, because they didn't have plans for Brian and they didn't have plans for Steve Austin. So, and we were going to try to make the most of this situation. Anytime that you start working together and traveling with someone, you become closer. And normally I'd be at the wheel. Brian would be riding shotgun, reading dictionaries, because he was always trying to increase his vocabulary for promos.
And began the pilgrimage out to Florida, cut through the bureaucratic red tape, and get that title shot.
So as it goes, we're going down the road, and he goes, "Hey kid, every tag team has to have a name, so what about the Hollywood Blondes?" He goes, "It's been done before, but it's been a while, so let's do that." And I was thinking to myself, well, I ain't come up with a better one. And so, like, I was cool with being the Hollywood Blondes.
Guess what?
The vests, the trunks, everything was Brian's idea. And we were two cocky, brash, arrogant guys. Then we started rolling the camera footage and stuff like that. You know, Brian, he had that shit-eating grin or that laugh, you know, when you're getting heat on a baby face. And Brian and I developed this bond and this chemistry. I loved tag team wrestling once I figured it out.
I hate to say it this way because it sounds really corny, but they were made for each other because they complemented each other so well. They worked hard to make each other look good.
The Hollywood Blondes also gave Brian a chance to open up as a heel, as a bad guy.
People nowadays are like, oh, I love the Hollywood Blondes. But if you go back then, they were getting booed out the building. And you love to hate them.
I think it was more natural for Brian to be a heel because, you know, he wasn't a guy that wanted to shake hands and kiss babies and smile. He wanted to be a smart ass. He wanted to be obnoxious. He wanted to show off.
Together, and I'll tell you another great match.
He was getting better at what he does, getting global exposure, partying, having fun.
Brian's fast and loose lifestyle doesn't mix well with his turbulent situation at home, and he pursues yet another woman who enters his already complicated life.
I think Melanie was working in Atlanta. She was a showgirl.
He saw her picture in a penthouse or something and says, I'm going to marry that girl, and somewhere along the line he met her.
My dad was sleeping with Melanie behind my mother's back because he was always in Atlanta.
Melanie would call the house, and that's basically, I think, how Rochelle found out about it, you know.
That'll do it.
She was hurt because, you know, they had a nice home, the family was happy, but then he had this other life in Atlanta, and then Melanie became pregnant, and that's how he had Brian Jr.
After another unexpected pregnancy outside of their relationship, Brian and Rochelle split up. Shortly after, Brian proposes to his new girlfriend, Melanie.
We went to Vegas, and he put on like a freaking St. Patrick's Day white tux with a big old ugly green bow tie. And I had a white dress, mind you. The stripper in a white dress. Yeah. And I had a big old green corsage on. And I loved it, every second of it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. My name is Melanie Pillman. I'm the widow of Brian Pillman. In private, like, he's just more laid back and sensible acting. But he's one of the most intelligent men I've ever met in my life. Like, so well-read, and he just excelled at so many things. He was my soulmate. I mean, I couldn't have picked a better guy to love than him.
His first years with her, I thought he was very happy. It'd be a big thing with his Christmas card, because it would be him and the wife and all these little kids.
Because I had my 2 kids, you know.
He would show up with like 3 or 4 little kids. They all had different mothers. They'd be climbing on him. He'd be carrying a couple, and one had his legs around his neck, and one was on the shoulder, and he loved those kids.
He was counted on, he was depended on to provide. That responsibility is what pushes you to keep going to work. You have to provide for your family.
Stunning Steve and Flying Brian.
And finally, they made the decision to give the Hollywood Blondes a big main event match. It was going to be on a Clash of Champions, and Ric Flair was returning. He was going to be involved. And the rating came in, and it wasn't very good. And they couldn't blame Flair because he was a big star, so they put the heat on Brian Pillman and Steve Austin. Well, the Hollywood Blondes didn't draw a rating. And that kind of doomed them there as being featured in a more prominent capacity going forward.
It felt like betrayal. I wish someone would finally tell me why the company decided to break us up, because we started getting over as a viable tag team that could hold, you know, world championship belts. We did. We make chicken shit into chicken salad, and now you want to split us up with no real clear direction for either one of us. So breaking us up broke my heart.
I don't know of any other talents that had been buried because they drew a bad rating. At the time, TBS was drawing a lot of bad ratings. But I think there was probably somebody that just thought, I don't want to use these guys, and they used that as an excuse.
How that was handled, I look back on it today and still shake my head that we could have done better.
I would say the period from 1990 to 1993, it was very frustrating for Brian. Also, there was some knowledge early on that his home life was not as happy as it could be.
I felt like my dad allowed Melanie to run the show. Melanie treated my mom very poorly. I feel like she was very jealous of my mother.
Melanie didn't like him talking to her. She didn't like me and my mother talking to Rochelle. You know, she made it hard to like her because she just caused trouble. And then Rochelle took off and didn't tell anybody where she was.
Rochelle is scheduled to see Brittany for a visit, but she never shows. No one is able to get a hold of her, resulting in a missing persons report. Several days later, when Rochelle finally surfaces, Brian and Melanie take decisive action.
And Brian said, and I agreed with him, and I shouldn't have, we should just file for custody. And that changed everything.
Following the tag team breakup with Steve Austin, Brian's career has stalled, and the cracks in his family life start to break open, consuming those around him.
The custody battle.
Well, while we talk or hear about some of the turmoil in Brian Pillman's life, you know, maybe that was unavoidable, you know, from how he was booked perspective, but at least the breaking up with Steve Austin part, this is all before Steve Austin even debuts. I actually have Steve Austin's debut next month, which is ahead of schedule, but he's supposed to debut in December, and it's like, how am I supposed to make him Rookie of the Year if he debuts in December? So we're making him debut in January, like 11 months early. Anyway, this is a story about Brian Pillman, not about Steve Austin. So, let's see, that's the main event. But, Pillman here, opening up the card. Actually, yeah, we'll move him up. He's going up against David Schultz. And Schultz has been putting on some good matches. Pillman's been putting on some good matches. We got Dustin and Kendall opening up the card. Brian Pillman and David Schultz. As far as, I can't remember Schultz's gimmick right now. Rebel. Okay. Yeah. Brian Pillman doesn't need a specific reason to have to mess somebody's night up, like they were describing earlier in the doc here. They were talking about how he has that tenacity to kind of want to show that he is worthy of hitting the main event, and that's what he's doing here. He's aiming for the main event, so he goes out there. He's taking on Dutch Schultz, an old WWF guy, you know, had a big famous moment there that we can get more into detail later. It's got its entire own Dark Side of the Ring episode. But yeah, we've got him going up against Pillman, and Pillman's going to go over. Schultz has agreed to let him go over. I didn't have to do any talking to him. He was just cool with it. Schultz has come in. He's got 2 wins. He's going to get a loss, but we're going to keep him having some momentum, you know. He's still doing really well with his matches. He can go 15 minutes. That's all I ask. A lot of these guys you see me burying, not even really burying, just having other guys beat them, dominate sometimes. They can't even go 10. They can't go past 10 minutes. I mean, what am I going to do with that? The Crusher can't go past 6 minutes. So, it is what it is. But Pillman and Schultz, I think that would be a really good snug match. Yeah, let's see how it plays out here. I'll book a pre-show and a post-show real quick. We'll get back to the TEW action.
Battle started because Melanie didn't want Rochelle around. Basically, Brian had more money and could keep the attorneys paid, because the attorneys only work when you pay them. And Rochelle just didn't have any more money.
I was, you know, delivering stuff to the lawyer. I was bombarding her with these stupid things about returning past child support that she blew in Florida. You know, just little minutia that was making me feel like a better person. But really, in reality, I wasn't the better person. Nobody should try to take kids away from a mother. I should have never done that. In a million years, I would never do it again.
It just devastated Rochelle.
I was outside riding my bicycle one day, and this was at a time when she wasn't allowed to see me. And she came pulling up, and I just went running to her, and I was so happy to see her.
Rochelle was hugging her, and they thought she was taking her.
And here comes my dad, and it was just like this huge argument, and him pulling her away from me.
Melanie filed kidnapping charges against Rochelle.
And so my dad had got full custody of me, and in my mom's mind, she was just like, I'm gonna lose my daughter and I'm never gonna see her again. And so my mom called my dad's house, and she wanted to talk to my dad, but he was out of town. Melanie had answered, and Melanie told her, she said, even your own mother thinks I would be a better mother for your daughter than you'll ever be. And my mom called my grandma.
Damn.
She called her mother and told her mother what she was going to do. And then she shot herself. As I got the call to go to the
heavy
hospital,
topics on
she was
Dark
being
Side.
airlifted, and I was the closest, and I was the one at the hospital that they told, and then I had to tell everybody that she was gone. She died on the helicopter. So I had to call her mother and tell her mother. Oh, it was very hard to tell somebody, to tell somebody's mother that their child was dead.
It just destroyed Brian because he felt so responsible. I mean, he just was so upset. He cried and he cried. And he said, do you think it was all that pressure we put on her? I think it was, Mel. I'd be like, yeah, it probably was. So Brian, he wanted to pay for her whole funeral and everything.
Did I do the right amount of angles?
And at the funeral, he held it together until they closed the casket. And he lost it. He was hugging me and sobbing. And in fact, at one point, I kind of looked at him because I thought he was going to pass out. He was devastated. He was devastated.
I felt so guilty for that for years. And I think I drove her, maybe not just me, but I think incidents drove her to shoot herself. Rethinking it, I wouldn't have done it the same way. Nobody should have to fight for their kid. I mean, it wasn't like she was abusing her, so I don't really know what my problem was back then. It was devastating. And I know it was for Brittany.
I have a lot of anger built up towards my dad in a sense because I do wish that he would have, you know, allowed my mom to at least see me because maybe she would still be here today. I don't know. She had a lot of issues, but Melanie was the overall cause. She's an evil person, and she's always been that way. Melanie should have never said those words to my mom. She's literally the devil, and they say, you know, you reap what you sow. And now she's living a life that she should have already been dead years ago because of all the drugs that she's done. But I feel like she's gonna live to be 100 years old and absolutely miserable for all the pain and suffering that she has caused me and my brother and, you know, my Aunt Linda.
And Brittany's the one that, you know, I don't know how to make it up to her. There's nothing, I don't really know how to make it up to her. I wish I could.
The guilt of Rochelle's death weighs heavily on Brian, and he dives even deeper into his career. With his contract renewal with the WCW looming, Brian is determined to renegotiate for even more money.
When we talk business, it's like, I have 5 kids. I don't know how many more years I can do this because my body's falling apart. I have to make big money now because I've got 5 kids.
This was his shot. He talks with Bischoff, that was evidently doing the contracts there. And Bischoff says to him, expect about what you're getting now.
He was pretty happy that I got him back to 225, but I think he wanted 4 is the number that he was really wanting. I couldn't give it to him. I couldn't justify it at the time that he wanted it.
He came to me and he says, what do I do? And what I told him was this. It's a question of value. When everybody's using everybody else, what can you do that other people can't do? What can you do that gains notoriety? This thing runs on attention. It runs on very superficial things. We got to create attention. How can we do that in the position you're in?
With his pulse on the wrestling landscape, Bryan knew that he had to find a way to up the ante in order to shock even the most hardcore of fans.
Bryan knew if he could make people legitimately believe that he was a loose cannon, that he was nuts, he was off his rocker, he was capable of doing anything or saying anything at any time, that he could be one of the hottest guys in the wrestling industry.
It was a pure money deal. What do we really want? Bischoff to offer you a hell of a lot more money, and we want Vince McMahon to see that you are of value and offer you more. And then you flip a coin.
If he could play one side against the other in the middle of the burgeoning wrestling war, then he would come out much better, 6 figures per year better. And that's what he set about to do.
Brian Pillman's plan was simple. More attention means more money. As the WWF and WCW are engaged in a ratings battle, Bryan exploits this to his advantage by playing them off each other while driving up his own value.
Bryan came up with the loose cannon idea and started slowly integrating it into his television appearances. Bobby Heenan was the color commentator. Bobby had had a broken neck, and he'd had surgery, and he was very protective of his neck. And Bryan goes around behind Bobby and starts grabbing him by the shoulders and everything. And on live television, Bobby says,
"What the fuck are you doing? Easy!"
And then Bryan knew he got it. He got gold out of it, right? Because now everybody's going to be talking about the F-bomb that got dropped on Turner Broadcasting. Bobby thought Bryan was nuts.
I think the brain is left.
It seemed real to the point where people were confused whether it was real or not.
One of the guys he was involved with was Kevin Sullivan, who was the booker, the matchmaker.
Oh my goodness, they got a fight going on here!
You know, they just beat the hell out of each other. And when Brian Pillman was ready to quit, when it was time for him to leave, he was like,
"I respect you, Booker Man."
I respect you, Booker Man.
The mere fact that he was acknowledging on national television that Kevin Sullivan was the head writer of a wrestling show was something that had never been done before.
Those that knew, and those that didn't know would need to find out what a Booker Man meant.
It was a big thing because those guys are sensitive about exposing the business.
When you're acting out a storyline that's considered a work, and a lot of the boys backstage weren't really sure if this was real or if this was a work.
The wrestling locker rooms had never been invaded that way before.
Because he knew if the other wrestlers believed it was real, then they would tell the newsletter editors, wow, that guy's really nuts, and the word would travel.
I thought, this is going down bad. Brian's getting fired, and I'm out of contact with him anyway, so I think he's completely lost his mind. You know, he's not even talking to me anymore.
The smart fans were starting to figure out that wrestling is manipulated, it's choreographed, it's predetermined. That guy's nuts, and he's real, and he won't do what they tell him. And that sells tickets because you had no idea what or whether it was supposed to happen or not. He was convincing people that he was insane.
Not only were the fans ready to be fooled, but all the wrestlers were, the management people were. There was a whole bunch of people that you could play like a violin.
Brian, I'd like to know, no, I'm not nervous. I'm not nervous at all.
It should be.
I don't think anybody, for sure, at any given moment, knew if or not they were really being worked by Brian.
But then he ended up working Bischoff.
I said, get him to give you some kind of release from his contract, from your contract.
Brian says to Eric Bischoff, if you fire me, And then I bust out on TV the week afterwards, and people will know that this has just gone out of control.
The people in the office, the bookkeepers, whatever, if they see that I'm still under contract, they're gonna tell Dave, and everyone's gonna know that it's all a work. So you have to really fire me.
If you give me this legitimate termination letter, then I can show it to everybody. And I can say, look what the guy did. Can you believe this? Can you believe he fired me?
He did. I gave him a release.
So he was then free to negotiate with Vince McMahon and the WWF against Eric Bischoff and WCW so he could get a better deal. All because Bischoff thought that he was working with Bryan to create this illusion, and Bryan was actually working Bischoff to create his own illusion.
Dude, I mean, how do you do that? I don't know anybody else that ever did that.
That's pretty different.
I mean, it was a legitimate termination, but it was a legitimate termination with a wink and a nod. I said, Bryan, go to WWF. I can't give you what you want. Get yourself over there so that when you come back, and I promise you I will bring you back, it'll give me the ability to pay you more because you've raised your own value.
In his world, it's his stunt. He is flattered that he's the guy that's pulling the great stunt, even though he was the power to begin with.
For anyone to suggest that the loose cannon character was designed to manipulate me into giving Bryan Pillman more money, when in fact Bryan Pillman and I discussed how to make this character work even better so that at some point I could give him the money, it kind of flies in the face of the rumors and the innuendo.
Well, man, that's the greatest thing you can do. If you can fuck somebody over and have them think that it's a great idea, that's, I mean, that's the trick of breaking up with a woman. Make her think that it's her idea.
As a free agent, Bryan takes charge of his own appearances and publicity. His insider knowledge, mastery of manipulation, and disregard for exposing the industry solidifies his position as the ultimate ringmaster.
In the wrestling war layout at the time, the fans knew one thing. If you are really working for one promotion, you can't appear for any of the others.
Tonight will be one of the most extreme hours of wrestling. Hey, wait a minute.
The things of trying to prove it was real is that WCW hated ECW, so Bryan must be on the outs with WCW.
Renegade promotion ECW is gaining traction for pushing the boundaries of wrestling and is the perfect stage for the loose cannon's unpredictable antics.
He could curse, he could say off-color things.
Eric Bischoff is each and every one of these motherfucking smart marks rolled up into one giant piece of shit.
I thought Bryan was losing his mind as opposed to being, brilliant.
I loved it. I was just nothing but entertained by it. Damn near whipped it out, was gonna piss in the ring. That's a pretty strong statement. And pardon my language, I'm like, man, this motherfucker's out there. And I mean that in a good way.
Get him the hell out of here.
This stuff was working on both levels. The fans who weren't inside, they just thought that he was crazy and he was doing wild, over-the-top things. But for the fans who did know the inside terminology or were with the secrets, they were like, they can't be allowing him to do that. When he would have a television appearance, it would be arranged so that it didn't look like he was supposed to be there, or he was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. One time, he even, to protest the matches that he'd been given, he wrestled a giant pencil, because pencil in inside wrestling knowledge was another name for the booker.
I always end up fighting with the pencil.
And then he's showing up and doing these funny little vignettes. He's got one he's cooking and flames are going out of the frying pan. And they hired a woman with a baby. And then the guy comes to punch Pillman, and he grabs the baby and holds the baby up in front. And
you scum, you piece of...
And I never once called Bryan and said, hey, dude, are you working? You shooting? Because I didn't want to know. But I thought what he was doing was damn sure brilliant.
Some people think my dad was crazy, and then, other people are like, your dad was, not crazy. That was just a gimmick. And a lot of people say he kind of fell into that, like they couldn't decipher if it was, is this Brian Pillman now, or you know, like is he still in character, or is this just how he is?
It's all just their perception of reality.
It was just like this blur between like what is actually going on, like you don't even know anymore. But that was like the magic of it.
There was a lot of Andy Kaufman in Brian. The loose cannon became Brian. That was who he was.
Brian was a renegade. Brian was a little bit of an outlaw. Again, remember, when you're not the biggest dog of the litter, and you got that gravelly voice, you've had 30-plus throat operations when you're a small child, you get an attitude. And I've said this many times, the greatest wrestlers I've ever worked with are essentially natural, organic extensions of their own personality. And the loose cannon was just that.
I think the message that Brian showing up in ECW sent to the other two companies is he's a free agent, that he was a gunslinger and he'd go to the highest bidder.
Vince is watching this. It's the hottest thing in wrestling. The only one that really knew what was going on was Dave Meltzer. I said, hey, we have to tell Meltzer. I value his friendship more than I value, you know, any of this shit.
Something happened. I called up Kim and I go, oh, God, Brian's in trouble. He just goes, you know, like, Brian's doing this. He's come up with a character, and you got to work everybody. Brian goes, what do I do with Dave? And he goes, you don't talk to Dave, because if you tell him, then he's going to have to say it, because that's his role, and I don't want you lying to him. So literally, like, he didn't talk to me for a couple of months there. You know, yeah, without a doubt, he wanted to fool me with the character. And he did for a while.
And again, who are the real marks? Who are the ultimate marks? Bischoff, and then we got Vince.
Vince McMahon was then, as he is now, the undisputed leader, ruler, manipulator, organizer, and owner of World Wrestling Entertainment.
What did you think of Vince at that time?
Vince?
Yeah, you personally.
Yeah, what do you know what you do with a whore? You fuck him. That's what I thought of Vince. That's all I think of Vince.
Yeah.
As Brian becomes the talk of the wrestling world, it's time for the final step of his master plan. Track down and secure the attention of wrestling's biggest power player. In perhaps his boldest stunt yet, Brian Pillman plots to get the attention of Vince McMahon at an insider industry trade show in Las Vegas, the last place anyone would expect to see the loose cannon.
Okay, so I'm in Vegas. I was in there and I was leaving, and Brian's coming, and Brian's in full gimmick at this point. And then I see him, hey, Dave, whatever. I'm leaving, and he goes, can I get your credential? And I go, yeah, here's my credential. And he went in and makes a beeline for Jim Ross and Vince McMahon.
He had an idea to be the most outrageous, outlandish, over-the-top character that Vince McMahon had ever met. He's going to try to get Vince McMahon's attention.
Doing his whole Brian Pillman, hey, Vince, hey, let's take a picture.
Vince McMahon, motherfucker, God almighty.
It's the greatest thing in the world. I got a chance to meet you. And they get their arm around you, and somebody takes a picture.
And Vince is like, who is this guy? He made an impression. You didn't know whether he was a homicidal maniac or just a guy that was having fun?
McMahon thought, I can't hire this guy, JR. We can't hire this guy, JR. He's crazy. I said, he's crazy like a fox. What do you mean? Well, he told me what he was going to do. He did? Yeah, he's creative. He's bold. He's kind of like you are, Vince. He'll take a chance. Brian's balls at that point in that day would probably fit in a wheelbarrow.
Dude, when you work Vince McMahon, you know, especially back in the day, pretty good rib. He got his attention, too. It was pretty freaking genius, what he was doing.
But he wanted to stay in WCW because WWF didn't offer guaranteed money. And also, Vince was always pushing the bigger guys. So Brian always felt that WCW was his company and the company he would do the best in anyway. People go like, oh, he did this manipulation of his contract to go to WWF. No, he did the manipulation of his contract to be able to negotiate with WWF to raise his money with WCW.
Brian's bold plan is a success, as he is in negotiations for major contracts with both WCW and WWF. All he has to do is choose the right path.
It didn't matter, like, where he wound up. It was just...
No! It's money! It's the bottom fucking line! Money! And these people are in fantasy land. It is money. The only problem is, like the Hebrew saying, man plans and God laughs.
We're talking, and it's always about, you know, I gotta save money, and then he buys an $80,000 Humvee. I couldn't fathom the idea of, I got 5 kids, I've got to make money now, I've got to save money, and then buying a Humvee.
He would drive that wherever Brian wanted to drive that. He didn't want to sit at the stoplight. He drove down a gully and up the other side in the Hummer. He didn't, you know, follow the rules.
I was actually in Miami modeling, but I called to check on the kids. And the neighbor across the street, I called her because I didn't get an answer. And she said, my God, I just passed the Hummer and little Brian's car seat's out in the middle of the yard and big Brian's being flown to the hospital.
Damn.
I remember he flipped it, rolled it. It was severe.
The wreck happened during the negotiations. They're getting damaged goods.
It was truly the deal of, you can get on the Tiger's back, but how do you get off? Fate figured that out.
There'd been a lot of wrestler deaths, but not of a guy who was actually on the way to the show at that moment.
It's like if Brian could just see the future and what happened, Brian would just, fuck, oh my God. No drugs, no nothing. I know it would have scared him straight.
It's crazy how you go from having a silver platter growing up to not even knowing when your next meal is going to be.
Yeah. Lucky us. Brian Pillman has 2 parts.
Previously on Dark Side
There's
of the
some
Ring.
more coming for
Sure,
us.
you can watch the Howard Blondes, and we could have been a great tag team if been left together. But if you can watch Flying Brian in his total element, being the loose cannon, you're seeing one of the true, really, really bright minds in the business of professional wrestling.
What the fuck are you doing? Easy!
He was on track to becoming the biggest star in wrestling by convincing people that he was the only one that wouldn't do what he was told.
I have been fired by Eric Bischoff!
Brian and I talked about it. I can't give you what you want. Raise the value in your stock so that when you come back, it'll give me the ability to pay you more because you've raised your own value.
Brian Pillman masterminded a cutting-edge character the wrestling world had never seen. Playing the system at its own game, he single-handedly turned the industry on its head in order to manipulate his way to the top.
If he'd play one side against the other in the middle of the burgeoning wrestling war, then he would come out much better, 6 figures per year better.
But did he want it for himself? He didn't care about himself. He cared about those little kids.
Lost inside his manic performance art, Brian's real life spirals out of control.
He was dependent on to provide for several different mothers and families, and I think that does weigh on a man.
A tragic turn of events would not only alter the course of Brian's career indefinitely, but also the lives of those closest to him.
I really believe that if it was not for the Humvee wreck, that everything would have turned out differently.
No Humvee wreck in TEW, thankfully. I have Kenny Deaths off.
Melanie called me, and she called to tell me that Brian had an accident, and it was bad. And he was airlifted to University Hospital and was in the emergency room. So I was the lucky one to go to the hospital. And I thought, oh, Jesus, here we go again.
When I got to the hospital, I walked right by the room.
Match. Crucifix armbar.
Like, that's his room, Melanie.
Brian
like,
Pillman
that's not my husband.
goes over
She's
Matt
like,
Bourne.
I know, it doesn't look like him, does it?
Because his hair was red with all the blood, and they hit him in a neck brace. I mean, his head was swelled up like a beach ball. And I thought, oh my God.
But it was really bad. His eyes were red, like, I didn't see any color than red, like blood. His eyes were just, ugh.
He had 6 different doctors for his face. There's one that just does the forehead, the lower mandible, the upper mandible, the nose, the eye sockets. Everything in his face was shattered. They had to put plates in his face, and they peeled his scalp back to make the incision and peeled his face down to put the plates in.
Word travels quickly that Brian has been in a terrible car accident, and there's talk of him losing a foot.
His ankle was shattered. In fact, the nurse told me that it was just like hanging off the table. She had to pick it up to put it back on the table. And then the doctor said, you know, that they would have to just fuse it into a walking position, that he wouldn't probably be able to run or even wrestle again.
I show up, and he goes, I said, don't talk, Brian, it's all right. Hey, I'm with you, I'm with you. I'm thinking, holy fuck, I don't know. And then he's got a titanium mask, and he's got things holding his legs together.
And once he kind of gained consciousness, like, what was his reaction to the accident?
I remember him crying in the hospital, just saying, I really messed up. I really messed up. Because he thought, you know, his career was over. And I said, just be grateful you were by yourself. There was no kids in the car. It'll be fine. But he was crying, saying, I really messed up.
So, to the best of your knowledge, what took place with the accident? What happened? What happened to Brian?
Oh, he fell asleep at the wheel. He had been up, and he went and picked up some of his medication, and I guess it hit him too soon before he got back to the house. And yeah, he just drove into a tree trunk off the side, and it threw the Humvee, totaled the Humvee.
Was there also maybe, like, was there substance issues with him at the time too?
No, just those muscle relaxers. Maybe a few pain pills.
Well, we are turning the microphone over to you, sir. We don't need any police reports or doctor reports. Can you tell us in your own words what happened?
70 miles per hour, and I instantly became Evil Knievel.
Huh,
Shot up in the air, then proceeded to come straight down, nose first, and luckily for me, I didn't have a seatbelt on because it shot me straight out, and I pierced the convertible top of that vehicle with my head like a bullet. Was shot out 50 feet away from the vehicle. It ended up doing 2 end-over-end flips.
Oh, my Lord.
When he came home from the hospital, I do remember him being in the living room, and I had a gift, and I wanted to give it to him. And I was just terrified because I'm like, that's not my dad. I don't know who that is. You know, as a child and seeing my father like that, I think it just kind of freaked me out a little bit.
I do have some small memories there of just seeing those bolts and how they're just screwed into his leg, and I'm thinking, what's going on here, you know? And it's like they look like they're greased up, but it's like, and not grease, but it's like blood, and like just it's all hardened, and it's just, oh, it was just a wild sight to see, you know, just some rusty bolts sticking out of your dad's leg.
Yeah, I really remember him just being like so exhausted and run down. I was just too young to really understand like what was really going on with him and like how ragged his life had become.
The loose cannon thing had gone so far at this point that a lot of the guys were convinced there was no wreck and it was Brian working again. And they're just trying to figure out what the angle is. How does he expect to get more money out of this or more attention out of this? Or, you know, was it really a wreck? Or maybe he just ran his car off the road and wrecked it to get, you know, publicity. He had created so much, not only mystery, but confusion about himself that even the guys that were his friends weren't exactly sure how to take him.
Perhaps he would have done that for attention. And then Kim, who would not work me, Kim is just like, no, it's real. And I told people, it's real. And then, you know, I think most people didn't believe me either. He was, you know, there's the Andy Kaufman thing in him. Faking an auto accident, perhaps he would have done that for attention.
There was even at one point a rumor that some of the wrestlers put out that he was having plastic surgery to look just like Shawn Michaels so he could go into the World Wrestling Federation and be the evil Shawn Michaels and fight him for the title. Guys believed that. because they thought Brian was nuts.
While the wrestling rumor mill is speculating the authenticity of the accident, media outlets also question Brian's intentions.
Brian, now you're not having plastic surgery and, going to go into the WWF as Shawn Michaels' twin or something. I don't know what goes on in America Online.
Think about that statement.
It's preposterous, but just...
Right now, I am owner of 4 steel titanium plates bolted to my face to hold everything together. I look like Brian Stephen Pillman with a swollen face and black eyes.
I can look back, and Brian was pretty honest with me most of the time, but the one where I know that he wasn't was right after the accident. And Brian, said like, oh yeah, the doctors told me, it's like, it's gonna take a while, but I will be 100%. The doctors have told me, and I know that the doctors told him the exact opposite.
I've had funk before, but I'm not
The wreck happened during the negotiations. He kept it pretty quiet how badly he was hurt. And if the real story of that wreck had come out at that point, I don't think he would have got a contract from either company. He could never again do physically what he had been able to do before. And he didn't want anybody to know that.
The object was to play Vince for money. And he did. Only he was near dead when he did. Vince signed him. And he signed him for more money.
Vince McMahon offers Brian a guaranteed 3-year contract. And although Eric Bischoff offers him more money, his deal is subject to be renegotiated every 3 months.
Brian knew at that point, because of the extent of the injury, that if he had an out clause in a contract, that at some point fairly early, it was going to get exercised.
The events that have taken place in my life, just in the past 8 weeks, have changed
They're going to steal Kendall Windham.
The future of my life, and from going from a point not knowing if I was going to live or not.
Your mentor is here, Kendall Windham.
Signing a contract with the World Wrestling Federation. It's a dream come true.
What changed about Brian coming into our company at that time, well, he's not going to be able to wrestle to any degree or even comparably to what he was.
Although Brian is still in rehabilitation for his injuries, he officially joins the WWF in 1996 with the loose cannon persona already in full force.
There's Brian Pillman. What's he doing here? Brian Pillman, recently signing with the World Wrestling Federation.
I just remember him coming in, and I was like, okay, let's see what he can do here in the land of, WWF. They'll let you go out there and push the envelope, but, how strong is he? Can he do it? And I would have, if I was going to bet on Brian, I was like, oh, yeah. If he could just get healed up, he's going to go right to the top.
I'm going to rape, pillage, and plunder this entire federation!
When Brian came home, he still had an IV. And he unhooked himself from the IV, go do the show, and then come back and hook himself back up again. He had to do that because of work. So then it wasn't fun for him anymore. I don't think he enjoyed it anymore.
That was what I consider the beginning of the end.
As Brian Pillman continues to struggle with his crippling injuries, an upcoming surgery keeps him out of any in-ring action. To disguise this from fans, the WWF devises a shocking storyline involving his old tag team partner.
I needed to do something to get some heat. We were in Cincinnati in his hometown, so it's always great to attack somebody in their hometown, especially him being in a compromised position.
Steve and Brian were still friends, and they still wanted to see each other succeed, and Steve was still on his way up. So we decided to put them together because we thought that they would enjoy it, and at the same time, the people would enjoy it as well.
Hey, wait a minute! What a cheap shot by...
I laid into him and started kicking the hell out of him. I broke that cane on his ankle. That brass duck head flew into the crowd.
Oh, my God!
I stomped a mud hole in his ass and walked it dry. That was a stiff beating I gave him. because it had to be. My character was a vicious, cold-blooded guy who was ruthless and remorseless. So had I not given him the beating that I gave him, who would have cared? They cared about Brian because I hurt his ass.
He may have re-broken Pillman's ankle here.
He gets Brian Pillman down and he puts a metal folding chair around the bad ankle and then stomps the seat of the chair.
Oh my God!
And Brian screams, oh my God, he's re-injured the ankle. Here's a way you can do that. I won't give away any secrets. But that was an excuse for Brian to have continued problems with the ankle publicly on television. It became in the industry known as Pillmanizing a body part.
Brian took that ass whooping like a damn man. He knew what I had to do, and he sold it like $1 million.
In the midst of a TV ratings war with WCW, Vince strives to produce edgier content to further capitalize on the feud between Pillman and Austin.
Somehow they decided, and I was not consulted on this, but they decided that it would be a wonderful thing if they did a remote from Brian Pillman's house in Cincinnati.
We are live.
Oh yeah.
Austin is
They did
outside of
decide
Brian
that.
Pillman's home.
Steve Austin came to find him and
Pillman's
stage a home
gotta
invasion on Monday Night Raw.
Austin trying to get into the house of Brian Pillman.
Were you excited to do something that felt so real and gritty at the time?
I always want to do something that feels real and gritty, especially something that's going to have the, you know, the volume turned up, the testosterone, the adrenaline turned up. I mean, hell, man, if you're just casually, if you're not a wrestling fan and you're kind of just flipping channels and all of a sudden you watch this 10 seconds of this scene, you're not going to change the channel.
Steve is a dead man walking because when Austin 316 meets Pillman,
Oh my
9
God.
millimeter cut,
Oh my God.
I'm gonna play his shirt is straight to hell.
All of a sudden, man, I start bashing in that window with that aluminum baseball bat.
What the hell is that?
And there's metal in there just shrieking.
It's Austin.
I remember Vince was like, all right, we're gonna have a Stone Cold, and y'all just wing it from there.
Don't go in there. Don't go in there.
Nothing like that had ever been done before in wrestling. It was kind of groundbreaking, whether it was in a good way or a bad way. People weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for it. The reaction was pretty negative to it. I mean, it was pretty darn negative. I didn't like it. I didn't like the idea of
pretty darn negative.
It seemed going really extreme, but that's the direction wrestling went.
Oh my God, he's back.
That's Brian. You know, I don't know whose idea it was and how much input he had on the idea. He never really told me that, but he was absolutely really into it. And they had to apologize for it the next week because the gun thing, you know, Vince had to actually go on television and apologize for that angle because it got so much negativity.
And on behalf of the World Wrestling Federation, for those of you who were offended, those viewers, we humbly apologize for the incident that took place last Monday night on Raw.
And I think that's the only angle Vince ever apologized for.
The Cornette here at ringside.
While still recovering from the car wreck, Pillman is temporarily sidelined as a broadcast announcer.
Yeah, I'm going to cut through all your duplicit rhetoric and cut right to the chase. Tell them like it is. And hey, if the censors don't like it, you're going to get fired. Not me. I'm Brian Pillman. I'll just go somewhere else and feed people up.
He looked at being an announcer as a come down. It was less than. It's not being a man. When I said, look, you can make a great living, you can take care of your health, he didn't want to hear it. Only thing he wanted to hear was me to encourage him that you can come back and be what you were, or really, really close to it. And I had never told him that because I've been lying.
You know, the competitor in him wanted just to get back in the ring and work. And he was working matches, but he was in a lot of pain.
The former Cincinnati Bengal has had 2 major surgeries on his leg.
Even though he was able to sometimes have decent matches, just because he was smart enough to know how, and he would fall on his face, do things that were dangerous in a different way, but not hurt the body parts that were hurt. It was really sad to watch. You know, he wasn't the same at all.
Brian needed to stay medicated more often than he should because of the pain he was in, because he was doing things that he shouldn't have been doing. He made it through because he'd say, oh, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm fine. He wasn't fine.
Consistently performing well beyond what his body can handle, Brian's dependency on painkillers and the pressure to provide for his family is pushing him to the point of no return. While rushing through recovery, Brian Pillman hampers any progress on his injuries by choosing to still perform in the ring, which results in his pain becoming all-consuming.
The only thing Brian ever told me was that if he had an ache or a pain, he took a pill. He said if it didn't go away, he took another one. And then he took a pill till it went away. He was sick, physically sick, with infection in his ankle because he was going to shows and not recouping it properly.
I would talk to guys in WWF, and they would tell me how he couldn't get through the airport. You know what I mean? He couldn't walk through the airport, and he's out there taking bumps in a wrestling ring. It's like he cannot walk through the airport.
I'd see him kind of walking around with his suitcase, and he wasn't moving so well. But Brian is one of those guys, and like a man's man, you just figure, whatever it is, Brian's got it. He's Brian Pillman. You know, and I could have seen the writing on the wall, but because of the regard that I held him in, thought it was going to be just fine.
When you have wrestlers that are missing shows or obviously unable to perform when they get there, then you know you've got problems. It wasn't that obvious with Brian. And how were you able to tell where the loose cannon ended and the real person began?
How was your guys' relationship?
We had some problems. We were having problems because he kept wrecking rental cars. He was definitely like nodding out at the wheel. He was definitely having issues. He acted as though he wasn't going to be around much longer. He used to say things like, if anything happens to me, make sure you move back to Atlanta and don't stay up here if you're not comfortable here, and make sure you find somebody so the kids have a father. I'm like, why would you even say something like that? And then the next day he wrecked a rental car.
I had become a bit estranged from him because he was fucked up. And one time he came to my house and he had a big welt. You could see the hole. It was like a, you know, the syringe. It was a horse needle syringe that went in there. And it was growth hormone or something. But he was fucked up. He was like, he kept repeating himself. And I said, this is it, Brian. I'll give you to 10. Get the fuck out of my house. My kids are upstairs sleeping. Don't ever come here in this state. Oh, yeah, but I got to do that. I said, no, I can't. I'm sorry. You're a friend. But get the fuck away from me right now. And he did.
Some of his friends had come to me when I was in charge of talent relations and say that this is becoming a bigger issue and I needed to intervene. And it was going to be tough because he was not going to appreciate that intervention. I called the agent, lead agent. I said, you know, I'm going to have a drug tester there tonight to test Pillman. And I said, make sure it gets done. He felt like I had betrayed him. That's what he told me. I can't believe you of all people would betray me. And that you always had my back. You're always there for me. And now this. I said, Brian, I'm trying to save your life. That's all I'm trying to do.
And Brian was calling me up. I hate Jim Ross. Why is he singling me out? Do you know how many guys in this company are doing drugs? And he goes, they're not going to find anything on me, nothing but my prescription pain pills. They're not going to find any illegal drugs in me. And in fact, you know, the only thing that they found in him was prescription pain drugs and steroids, which, you know, in an extent, you know, I don't know that that really counts for what they were looking for.
I had to lead Brian out of the path that he was on, to no avail. I failed. I needed to convince him that he's so talented that he was going to be a star in other areas of pro wrestling. I failed.
In October of 1997, at the Kiel Center in St. Louis, Missouri, Brian is scheduled to compete at WWF's pay-per-view event, Bad Blood.
In those days, the call time for talent at the pay-per-views was 1 o'clock. And sometimes guys would be late, oversleep, miss their flight, traffic, whatever, but
Jim Ross failed, but I had it better. I I'm booking Pillman in 88, and there's no injuries. And he's going up against Dutch Mantell. Dutch Mantell is, as we know, Dirty Dutch Mantell. And he's not a very nice guy. He does whatever it takes to get the job done, and that includes killing Mark Callis, turning him into the Revenant Undertaker. And although Brian Pillman will technically win this belt after some interference, the run is what's going to be important for our young babyface here. This is going to be a long run with the title. I don't know how many of it will be in this episode, but of course he'll still have the title, so it'll be going on throughout until maybe we bring Chris Benoit in to take it off him or something. He has 2-episode Dark Side of the Ring as well. Anyway, let's get back to it here. I mean, let's talk about this match a little bit too. Why not? We're already here, right? So we got Brian Pillman, the show stealer. We've got Dutch Mantell. Where is Dutch Mantell? Excuse me. Oh wow, major star. Dutch Mantell, the Rebel. And they're going to get out there. They're going to have a nice open match. And get it done. See, Dutch didn't complain. Dutch is a true professional. And he's an older guy, and he's cool with putting younger guys over, and I think maybe that's his protege. Could be wrong. Actually, let me find that out, because that's fucking cool if it is. Nope. Taz and Brian Knobbs. And Jeff Jarrett. So those guys. But yeah, he's cool with putting younger talent over, so that's good. That's good of him. But yeah, Dutch Mantell here. Gonna be dropping the International Light Heavyweight, and Brian's gonna get a nice run ahead of him. But yeah, let's head back to this.
By 5 o'clock, everybody was accounted for except for Brian. And that was egregiously late to be for a pay-per-view. So Bruce Pritchard asked me, I'm in talent relations, he said, try to find where he might be. Call the hotel where he stayed last night in Minneapolis, see what time he checked out. I get on the phone, and boom, the guy answers. I said, I'm with the World Wrestling Federation. We're looking for one of our wrestlers. He stayed there last night, Brian Pillman. Can you tell me what time he checked out? And the guy said, hold on a second. And he put me on hold. Okay, is he checking his records? And he answered, he says, sir? I said, yeah. He said, Mr. Pillman's dead. And the first flash that I had, what is Brian doing now? I said, is this a rib? And the guy said, no, the police are here now. I said, okay. So I told one of the production assistants, I said, go get Bruce. And he said, oh, Bruce is busy, he's doing that. I said, Brian is dead, go get Bruce. And Bruce came in and got on the phone, and I just kind of walked off because I did not want to hear that news right now. 23 years later, I didn't want to hear that news.
It's not good news.
On October 5th, 1997, Brian Pillman was found dead in his hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota. He was 35 years old.
It's hard for me to still think about it today and think of that heart of that athlete, that performer, stopping. Just doesn't seem believable.
It almost didn't register with me because I'm like, Brian ain't dead. Because he couldn't die. If you knew Brian, this force field of energy that he was, I thought could never be stopped. I honestly thought that.
State police showed up on the door and said that he had to tell me that my husband was found deceased.
as a kid already in this show business world, I was thinking, like, is this work? Like, is he really dead? Like, no, he's surely coming back. Like, I didn't even know what to think. I didn't even cry when my dad died. And I just remember, like, my family we're all sitting on the bed, like, hugging each other and crying, and everybody's crying. And I'm looking around, like, where's the camera crew? They got to be around here somewhere, you know. I was like, all right, I'll play the spot here, you know. We'll all just hug and pretend we're sad. But then, like, reality set in. I'm like, oh shit, he's really not coming home. Like, holy crap. As a kid, that's just kind of what I thought. I figured, you know what, he went to work that day and he decided to stay there.
The next night on Monday Night Raw, the news of Brian's death is broadcast live.
Yesterday afternoon, Brian Pillman was found dead in a hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota.
I remember when we tolled the bell 10 times, that was when I got emotional. I remember very emotional, and that's when I was like, he's gone. He's gone.
And then I remember talking to, I think Jim Ross. I said, hand the phone to Owen. And then Owen says, I don't know what happened. Then Vince got on the phone and he says, do you want to, talk on camera? And then I just thought, well, you know what? With Brian, the show must go on.
Joining us now, ladies and gentlemen, in suburban Cincinnati, the wife of Brian Pillman, Melanie Pillman. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I did say to Vince, please don't ask me about drugs or anything like that, because I do not exactly know why he died yet.
Brian, because of his injuries, has had to take a great deal of prescribed medicine.
And the first thing he does is start talking about pain pills, and then I'm like, that's Vince, all right. I made like a really funny face, and I remember that's the only clear part of that interview I can remember thinking, wish this motherfucker was standing here so I could smack him. Because he swore he wouldn't say anything like leading down that direction until the death certificate came out.
I think all athletes, to a degree, experience a reliance on pain medicine, and I knew it was just a matter of time before it happened to someone, and fortunately, it was my husband, and I just want everyone to know that I hope it's a wake-up call to some of you, because it could be your husband next, or it could be you, and you don't want to leave behind a bunch of orphans like my husband did.
I absolutely despised the grieving widow interview. I didn't like it on a wrestling program. I was uncomfortable with it. I didn't know why she had to go out there and have to answer these questions that were obviously meant to elicit tears and etc. for television, say for good television. I thought he should have sent her a check for $100,000 and kept her ass off TV, is what I thought.
Have you had any opportunity to think about what you, now as a single parent, will do to support your 5 children?
Vince, I don't even really know what day it is, so I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, and everybody's like, oh, that was so horrible what you did to her. I barely remember it. I didn't really think about not doing it, but nobody pressured me into it.
I hated it. I didn't want to relive and regurgitate this matter to pop a rating. And to me, that's what it's all about.
And what was the official cause of death?
Heart disease. And see, my father died of a massive heart attack at 55.
What were your memories of his funeral?
We got there early before people came in, because it was supposed to be family and friends. And when we walked in, there was a camera crew there. And I walked up to him and I said, who are you? And I said, you're not supposed to be here. They said, well, Melanie said we can. And I said, well, I'm Brian's sister, and I'm telling you, no, you can't. And they left.
Did many wrestlers show up?
No. Just Vince and Jim Ross were there.
They had an open casket, and I knew then this was going to be really tough. there's the last time I saw him. That's the last time I've seen Brian lying in a casket. And that was just gut-wrenching, absolutely gut-wrenching. I just stared, and I had memories floating back when I was looking at the corpse. I'm thinking, this shouldn't be a part of my pro wrestling career. This should not be a part of my journey in this crazy business. And we shouldn't be burying a guy that's this young, and he's got a young family around him.
At the very end, everyone's gone except for, you know, a couple family members. And the little girls, they're kind of running around, and they're not like crying or anything. They're just little kids, and they go, we gotta say goodbye to Daddy, and they all run to the casket. Goodbye, Daddy, goodbye, Daddy. It's like,
And I think for me, I was just in complete shock. I just, you know, I couldn't put it all together. I just couldn't believe it, because it's like I lost my mom and now my dad, you know, and I was just a lost little girl.
Oof. What do you remember from that day?
Going through the motions and pretending I was still alive and I had a soul. I just felt like I just didn't know what to do. Right now, like, it's the same day almost.
What do you mean?
I mean, I can bring myself back to that same pain in my heart. If I let it go too long, which I'm just gonna stop now, if that's okay for a second.
He had such an impact, such an influence on so many people's lives. It had to have hurt.
Why is Rockin' Rebel doing road agent work? Oh my gosh.
The person that hurt the most was Melanie, was my mother.
Okay.
She dealt with losing what was ultimately the love of her life.
After Brian is laid to rest, his children are jolted into their new reality.
But Brian gets
I never really had a problem with Melanie until my father passed, and then, you know, like, her true character revealed itself.
I spiraled out of control.
Oh,
I wasn't the best
they're
mother in
worn
the world.
out. They're worn out.
I always loved my kids.
The fans are tired.
Up until this day,
no.
Melanie receives royalties from my father's legacy, which I have seen 0 cents.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, they said I was a gold digger too, and I spent all the money I ever got on crazy stuff. Some of it was spent on crazy stuff, but not the way they said.
We stayed at my dad's house for a while, and then things got really bad, and we moved, and, you know, running water would be turned off all the time, electric would be turned off. It's crazy how you go from having a silver platter growing up to not even knowing when your next meal is going to be.
It took a downward spiral. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It got worse and worse and worse and worse.
Depressed a lot, sleeping a lot, drinking too much. Brian found me passed out one time, and I almost died of alcohol poisoning. I was like 12, and found me on the floor with a bottle of vodka above my head. No kid should have to see something like that. Craziness.
When my mother remarried and my stepfather came into the picture,
Hulk Hogan, Harley Race, and the Rougeaus.
On the side of them, and there was a lot of neglect. My stepfather was very physically abusive with my sister and myself. I would be grounded to my room. You're grounded for the next 6 months, you know, I better not see you out of your room. He had dogs more or less trained to abuse me as well, and if I was grounded, like, these dogs would make sure I was kept in my room. Like, they would bark at me and they would bite me and they would physically, like, keep me in my room because of how I was verbally and physically abused by my stepdad. Like, these dogs would adopt that mentality of like, attacking me. And then I was just so abused that my developing socially was very hard for me. And that's how, you know, like, nobody took me out to throw a baseball with me, you know? Like, nobody took me out to throw a football, you know? So I went to school, I didn't know how to play sports, you know? I wasn't very athletic, you know, so I couldn't catch a football, couldn't throw a baseball. But I was big into games and video games and stuff, and I had a GameCube, and eventually he caught onto that. My stepdad would catch onto that shit. He'd unplug it, you know, he'd throw it against the wall. It's like everything I ever latched onto or loved was taken away. It was hard. It was a hard time.
While Brian Jr. and Brittany grow up with Melanie, Danielle lives with her mother. As the siblings drift apart, their Aunt Linda takes action.
At least once or twice a month, I would get them together, and so they didn't lose contact with each other.
She is literally everything. I swear, I think that she is a true angel. I don't have a mom, but she's the closest thing I have to as a mom. I can call her at any time. I mean, she took me in, you know, she bought this house so we could have a home and a family. And I don't know what I would do without her. I really don't.
They'd all come to my house. There's a spider in the bathtub upstairs. I don't kill anything. You know, I always take them outside when I find them. Brian has a deadly fear of spiders. And there's one, and I saw it this morning. I thought, oh, I'll get that later. I didn't think he'd go to the bathroom.
I love Linda to death, and she's helped the kids a lot. And I just want them to forgive me. But do I know if they will or not? I don't know.
Brian Pillman lives on in the hearts and minds of his family, but his legacy would return to the ring in a way no one would anticipate.
Brian Pillman's legacy in wrestling lives on in that he created a character that people still remember to this day because it was in large part himself.
He's a guy that overcame a lot of odds and totally kicked ass in an industry of guys that were much, larger than him. I would have loved to see what the next 10 years would have played out for him had he never had that damn car wreck.
He knew the hand that he was dealt after the accident. Wasn't a damn thing he could do about it, which killed him. Figuratively, and I think eventually, literally.
Brian's death started a domino effect that forced people to recognize the steroid issue, but put extra focus on the real cause of people dying too young, which is pills.
The only hurdle he couldn't get across was the last one, and it was his own body that had betrayed him. The biggest legacy, though, unfortunately, is what would have been, where he would have gone, what heights he would have achieved, how much bigger and better he would have gotten.
He saw the end goal. Like, he was so close to, like, really just, like, completely making it, like, in wrestling.
Would he have been, along with The Rock and Steve Austin and a few other guys, the biggest star in wrestling 5 years later? Probably. One of them.
It's very likely.
Right now, what are your biggest goals, would you say?
Just rebuild my relationship with my kids. Having my kids not be mad at me by the time I die. We'll see if that happens.
My dad's not here, so if I got one parent left that I can go, oh, well, that's my mom. That's just the way she is, like, sure, I could live the rest of my life hating her, but where does that get me? Ever since I've rekindled my relationship with her, I've been happier in my personal life. I've been better in my relationships with women. I've been more understanding of people's plights and people's vices. I've been just a much more mature adult in general since I've buried the hatchet with my mother, so to speak. And in many ways, I'm very happy that I have a parent left on this earth to speak to and talk to,
I called Mel a time or two, and man, we just lost contact. And man, I reached out to You know, Brian Jr., a couple years ago, I had one of Brian's old weightlifting belts.
Out of nowhere, a sign from the wrestling gods comes in the form of a cell phone call from Stone Cold Steve Austin to tell me that he has a Cardillo weightlifting belt that belonged to my father and that he wants to mail it to me and give it to me. And I'm like, you know what? If that's a sign, that's a sign.
Following in his father's footsteps, Brian Pillman Jr. decides to become a professional wrestler.
When he first said he was going to wrestle, like, it struck terror in my heart. I was like, oh my God, he'll have fractured relationships. His kids won't get the attention. He's going to travel all the time. He's not going to be able. And then I saw him perform. And I saw the look on his face when he knew that he was creating homage to his dad. And I realized this is it. This is what's supposed to happen.
He just woke up one day and he was going to be a wrestler, and I literally laughed. I'm like, you, a wrestler? All you do is sit in your room and play video games. There's no way that you're going to be a wrestler. And it was just crazy. Like, he was determined, and he quit his job that he had just graduated college, and he was going to do it. And I was very hesitant at first just because of everything my dad went through, and I didn't want my brother to fall into that same lifestyle, so I was scared.
I think he'd be proud of it. His son wants to carry on the Pillman name. He wants to make his father proud of him. He wants to accomplish something on his own, but yet pay tribute to his dad. I think Brian would be into that. I just think he might be worried that Brian Jr. is in it all by himself. He's got some people looking out for him, but I think Brian Sr. would a whole lot rather be there and keep an eye on him.
Great kid, looks a lot like his dad. And I talked to him about these things. There's a lot of great traits, Brian, that your dad had that I hope to God you can acquire. And then there are some, not so much. You have to learn where you draw the line. Use his passion, use his intellect, use his athletic ability, use his love of the game. But then don't get too far off the beaten path. Don't be a loose cannon, Brian Jr. Don't be a loose cannon.
You know, a lot of people, oh, you know, do you think your dad would want to wrestle? And it's like, well, he kind of put his stamp of approval on me to be a wrestler when he named me Brian Pillman. You know, there's really no going back at this point. So, no, it's just tragic to know that we never got to have that ultimate father-son relationship. But in a way, it inspires me to be a good father one day, you know. So I think that's my goal in all of this, through wrestling and everything, is to be a father. So, you know, that photo is very symbolic to me. You know, he's kind of holding me up, and I always look at it for inspiration. You know, so I would hope that one day I would, you know, have a son like that. You know, to kind of hold up as the future, you know. It's like he's kind of giving me his blessing there in the photo. So
Pillman and Mantell.
He contributed
Chef's
a whole lot
kiss
to the
at the
wrestling
end.
business. He
Cherry
pushed
on
the
top,
envelope.
100
The loose cannon
promo.
gimmick is one of the best ones ever created, and Brian was one of the best friends that I had in business. And I hope that he thought the same about me. Love Brian.
A 92 match. Pillman outperformed Dutch 86. They stole the show. Literally stole the show. And you know what, guys? This show's gone. They stole it. It's gone. And that's the end of it. Have a good one. Peace out. Enjoy.